Have you ever wondered how to make sense out of your messy life or how to live in peace in the middle of a stressful world? My name is Jamie Norton, and I want to welcome you to the Making Peace and Beyond podcast, where we talk about life struggles and how to live in the peace, joy, and freedom that Christ died to give us. Today, I'm really excited to have an awesome guest, Josiah Stumbo. Josiah is the young adult pastor for Grace CMA Church in Middleburg Heights.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. It's been so fun knowing you over the past years. You're somebody I look up to so much and have spent time under your teaching and spent time in your office and just have gained so much from you. And this topic of shame really is something that you've taught me a lot about, especially recently, that I'm starting to really just beginning to unpack. So this is going to be a fun conversation because I've still got a lot of questions.
You wonder why in the world we should even talk about this in a podcast, but shame is the universal emotion. It is one that is the first emotion we actually ever felt. Once we became aware of ourselves, someone said one time there was a time when we were so covered in love and so covered in grace that we could just walk around naked and not even know it. But when I'm naked, I know it. And that's when we became aware of who we are, and the first feeling we felt about that was shame. So it's a really, it's actually Satan's greatest tool to use against us, to isolate us, to make us separate from each other, and to gain control over us. So it's really an important topic to talk about.
Yeah, it seems like one of the methods he uses to get us to feel shame is to make it confusing and make it kind of concealed, especially as I've been noticing kind of you help me see for the first time how pervasive it is in my life. And I start to realize, wow, so many of my decisions are made with kind of shame underneath it. And so many of my insecurities come from that. And so maybe to help us like with some clarity, can you stab at a definition of what shame even is?
Shame is basically vulnerability. It's the feeling that we have of being inadequate, of being dependent, of when we're vulnerable, we are actually subject to be hurt. And so we're exposing ourselves. That's one of the things that reasons that we hide is we've been hurt and we're afraid to show ourselves to each other. But shame does also come in 3 different forms. And each one of those forms is from a different source, but it also is what keeps us from being able to really know what to do with it. The first form is shame we really need to keep. It's just the fact that we are helpless, we are inadequate, we are vulnerable, and that's really scary in a dangerous world. But it's also what brings us to our knees and makes us know that we need help. We need each other. We need God. We need people around us. And that initial natural shame is basically the first time that we felt shame at all and started to hide. It's interesting. The first feeling we felt was shame, and the second feeling we felt was fear, the fear of being known. And just that whole idea of someone seeing our vulnerability, someone seeing our inadequacy. And when we started to hide from each other, because we were scared. And I have never in 40 plus years of being a counselor ever met anybody who did not want to be loved. But almost everybody I've ever met is terrified to be known. And we can't truly be loved until we're truly known. And so there's a real double bind in there, a real dilemma that we have. So natural shame is the kind that we have to accept in order to allow other people into our life, in order to invite people into our life, in order to surrender ourselves to God as well. And so there's just but it gets complicated because when we're born into a family or a situation, or we grow up in a situation that has, we're unsafe, where people can't love us well, then we develop another kind of shame, and it's the trap that most people have, is imposed shame.
Okay, this is the second type of shame.
That's the second kind.
Right.
And imposed shame is shame that doesn't even belong to us. It belongs to the abusive parent, the negligent parent. It belongs to the bullies in school. It belongs to people who have betrayed you, hurt you, abandoned you. But we have a tendency to take it onto ourselves and feel somehow responsible for that. And as children, there's not a whole lot else we can do. I mean, a child cannot at 4 years old look at an abusive parent and say, you know what, you're really a lousy parent and you're really inadequate at doing this, and I'm just going to pack my little suitcase and move down the street and live with the Joneses. So we can't leave, and so we end up believing there's something wrong with us. There's something wrong with me because I have needs. There's something wrong with me because I have feelings. Something's wrong with me because I have boundaries. And so we start trying to hide those things that really make us human. And so imposed shame is really, we can't repent of someone else's shame. And we have to give it back. And that's kind of hard because you don't just say to a parent, you know, wow, you know, your drinking really is hurtful to us, you know, because then things just get worse. So we stuff things, and we sit with that. So imposed shame is really difficult because it can't be repented of.
Okay.
The third kind of shame is moral shame, and that's basically sin. Sin is anything that separates us from God, and anything that separates us from God ultimately separates us from each other. And so that is our stuff. I know when I was growing up with alcoholic parents, you know, I learned a lot of really destructive, self-destructive behaviors. But then it became my sin, you know, them stuff I was doing, choices I was making, you know, that was there. But the blessing is that we have a way back. You know, I mean, you go into the courtroom and you tell the judge your worst stuff, and he says, you are guilty. You did all of this wrong stuff. And he's getting ready to impose a lifelong sentence of shame on you. And Jesus walks in the back of the courtroom and says, excuse me, Judge, I'm here to take that shame. That person is free to go. You know, I mean, that is the gift that we have of being set free by Christ. And I think one of the things that is on my heart to share is how often as a church or as people we really don't receive that freedom. We think he said free to be in parole, free to be on probation. We continue to walk in guilt and shame after all the trouble that Christ went to set us free. And so I want to just say there's a way back. There's a way back to wholeness. There's a way back to being fully human. There's a way back to accepting both sides of ourselves, you know, that we can accommodate the fact of our vulnerability. We can accommodate the fact of our neediness and our limitedness and our feeling and emotional states. And still be okay. You know?
Yeah. Which one does the enemy use most often to get at us, or is it all three?
I think all three. I think the initial shaming was of our human beingness, the fact of our neediness, the fact of our limitedness, the fact of our emotional volatility, and but I think that's the one we have to reclaim as being good.
So that's a shame we're not trying to necessarily recover from or change. That's one we're trying to get back to.
Right.
But the other two, the one where I didn't even do anything wrong, but for some reason I feel shame about something somebody else did, or the one where I did do something wrong, but I have a Savior who's forgiven me, and now I can. Those two, we've got some work to do. I've got some work to do.
What would you say that work is, Josiah? What is something that might resonate with you there?
Yeah, one thing that as I was sitting in your office last fall, you helped me discover was this imposed shame, the second one you mentioned. There were some people in my past, in my college years, that I felt responsible for. I was a natural leader, and I was leading them, and they ended up making one ended up making bad choices. The other one just ended up in an unhealthy mental state, probably not even from any bad choices, but both of them I felt all sorts of shame from. I felt guilty and responsible. And I remember sitting in your office and talking through both of these situations. And the first one you said, that's not your fault. You can't be responsible for somebody else's actions. And I said, well, but leaders are supposed to be judged more strictly, and I'm a leader. And how about a little bit of that guilt is mine, right? Isn't there a little bit that's my guilt? And you thought for a second, but said, no, like, you are not responsible for somebody else's choices. And that really was liberating. It was interesting that I probably could have told you that, like, philosophically or theologically about somebody else, but I needed to look in your eyes and have you look in my eyes and tell me that, and kind of give me permission to not feel guilty about something that wasn't my actions and it wasn't my choices, but it did feel like I just kept hanging on to it. And so to have that exposed, that tool of the enemy to keep me feeling very heavy. So every time I would think of either of these two people, just this weight of dark heaviness would come over me because of the shame that I felt and the imposed, maybe even self-imposed. Is that a thing? Self-imposed shame?
Well, I think the only way shame can be imposed is if we receive it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because many times people will make every attempt to make us responsible for their behavior. Mm-hmm. I'm angry, but you made me angry. It's probably one of the more common things you'll hear. It's your fault that I did this, because that's what Adam and Eve did. We blame, shame, shift. We seem to have this need to make other people responsible for our behavior. But unless you receive that, you don't have to have to feel that you are. And so that's it also, you just also pointed to the thing that traps us in shame, which is secrecy. In recovery circles, we say you're as sick as the secrets you keep, because it's our secrets and the hiddenness that makes shame grow. Shame cannot live in the light. Yeah. It only can grow in the dark. And so when we begin to put it into the light, it gets defeated, especially if we can look into the eyes of acceptance. I think it's interesting in 12-step programs, one of the things that is part of the steps is that you do a fearless and searching moral inventory of yourself, which is to really look at all of the things you've done wrong, and then you confess to God and to one other person the exact nature of your wrongs. And the reason for that is that when we can tell somebody our worst stuff and they say, is that it? Or they give us their phone number, then we're looking into the eyes of acceptance. I just told you how horrible I am, and you're looking at me with acceptance. And that is the first beginning of reconnection with other humans. Yeah.
And it's the antidote to shame, it seems like. I remember, and it was also funny in your office. I like to try to fix it. I wanted to leave each session with something I could do, and in the past it's been journaling. I've done a lot of journaling, and that's been really healthy for me in a lot of ways. Actually, now I do look back at my journals and see shame all over them, which is interesting. But I was prepared. I think I even asked you, so what's a journal prompt that I can go home and fix my shame with? And you told me that that's not something that I can journal through. There's some awareness that I could be aware of what shame feels like to you, but you said that I need the way past shame is people, like you just said, somebody you can. So you told me, think about all the things that you don't want to talk about and find some people that you can talk about them with, and that acceptance is what's going to be your way through the shame. And so that was another pretty new thought for me, but it makes so much sense that.
And that's the trap. Yeah. The trap is you don't want people to see this, and you're terrified to be known. You're terrified that somebody would either not accept you or, reject you, abandon you, or put you in jail or something if they really knew you. And yet there's no way back except through other people and community. I mean, we have to be able to. And I think the knowledge that we have a God who loves us and knows us already is really such an essential part that we're already known and loved. We just have to let other people be there to love us as well. And I've been shocked. I mean, in doing Making Peace and Beyond weekends for the last, almost 40 years, I remember telling my story and I told them, started those weekends in some pretty conservative churches. And I would sit there and I would look at all these women that I thought were very not like me, that they were okay, because my life has been such a checkerboard. And I was a teenage pregnancy at 16. My father, and I know he loved me. He was an alcoholic, and his whole way of dealing with things that he didn't want to see was to avoid them, and so and to deny them. And so he said, if I want you to be able to live a normal life, so I'm going to send you 3,000 miles away to live with your cousins, and you're going to lie about why you're there. And the message to me was a total shaming message, because it said to me, you cannot exist as you are. You cannot have your experiences. You cannot have your life.
And you have to live in secrecy.
You've got to live in secrecy. And so I'm sitting here in front of all these people that I think are not like me. And one of the things I do is, in Making Peace, is tell my story, because I truly know and accept the freedom that Jesus died to give me. So I'm telling my story. But I noticed, and I still, after all these years, when I finish my story, I'll have 1 second or so where I'm looking around for the eyes of judgment. And I'm like, why are you still here? I mean, why would you let me be your teacher for the weekend? I mean, what is that all about? So it was not, that was my own moral shame. And I have to really receive forgiveness, in order to be able to be comfortable with being me. And not walk in guilt and shame, because shame is the most isolating tool that Satan has to use.
What you said about shame being you need to look in the eyes of somebody else and see the love of God for you. I experienced that in your office, and there's one other mentor in my life that I would say I would leave his meetings with him, and he was unlocking for me characteristics of God that I wouldn't have been able to discover on my own, no matter how much I read the Bible about his love and his forgiveness and his mercy. Something about another person who believes it a little better than you, or understands it a little deeper than you, maybe, that God truly loves and what his grace really actually means, to carry that from his heart and pour it out through their acceptance and through their eyes of, I see you, I understand, and I still, like you just said, I still do accept you. And so I felt kind of this realization, again, I've had it several times, I guess, in my Christian walk, but this realization again that, God is better than I thought he was. And I can see it now that I've actually been trying to hold on to some regret or some bad feelings about things I've done in the past to punish myself, or to remind, like, maybe if I think about it enough, I'll never do it again, or if I keep my head down. But you were helping me understand that that's not what God wants for me. He wants freedom for me, and he wants, when he says I'm forgiven, he means it. So to have somebody else look at you in the eye and tell you that, really, it was fascinating to me to realize there's stuff that I don't know if I could possibly learn about God without people who are further along in the faith and have a deeper understanding of his heart revealing it to me. Even though it's all written right here in the Word, I don't understand these words without people mirroring for me what that looks like. So that was revelatory.
Think really, until we accept ourselves in the natural shame way, until we accept who we are as a human being, that we are truly vulnerable and helpless, that we truly need each other, we can't survive on our own. Until we really accept that, it's like we just hide, and in that isolation, it's really dark and it's really lonely, and sometimes I think of it as a really dark room. And as long as we keep the room dark, we don't really see it. And we don't really think about it. We've got it all figured out. We try to, but if you let light come into that room, then you start seeing the mess. And one of the things that you'll see happen until we accept who we are as a human being, until we accept all of the flaws and the inadequacies that we have, we will not receive love well because love is light. And so when a person tries to love us, we'll still be on guard. And I've known people that have been married for 25 years, and I want to introduce them to each other. I mean, they've never met each other.
Wow.
They don't know about major things that have happened in each other's life. And it's so sad because, you know, they don't really believe that they're loved because the whole guys in the back room will be saying, if they really knew you, they wouldn't care. If they really knew you, they wouldn't love you. You know, no one could love you because of who you are. You know, and yet when you see that that's not true, that's a great giant lie. You know, in fact, one of the things that I see happen over and over and over again in Making Peace is a group of strangers come together. And on the first night, they're all sitting there thinking, why did I agree to do this, and how can I get out of here gracefully? You know, and by Sunday, they're hugging each other and wanting to exchange phone numbers, and because they've taken a risk to become vulnerable with each other, and they've been received, and they received compassion and concern and empathy, and they also get to know they're not alone. Somehow, one of the most arrogant things, because pride is the flip side of shame. It's all comparisons, like I'm worse than other people or I'm better than other people, which is pride. And it's like all of a sudden they're realizing that I'm neither. I'm just like everybody else, that people are just people. You know, we all have more in common than we don't.
Yeah, that's liberating. And it's so liberating to realize that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, well, why would we hide from each other?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not alone. And it's prideful to think that we're by ourselves. You know, I mean, that we're the only one out of billions and billions of people in all of history that ever was as bad as I am, you know, and as unforgivable as I am, you know, and as unlovable as I am. And it's just not true. I don't care where you've been or what you've done or what's been done to you. There's a way back.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. I had 12 years of perfect attendance at Sunday school, and I had no idea that there was a way back, that's exactly why Jesus came. But God in His mercy brought people all the way through it. I call them my personal missionaries who loved me in spite of myself. They loved me anyway.
Yep.
And I think it helped me to understand what that's all about, you know, is that our job is to love each other and give each other a safe place so that they can work out their issues with God, not with us. So, Josiah, as you think about shaming yourself, what are some of the things you've found in yourself that indicate you're feeling ashamed? Or what are some of the things that you may have seen in some of the people that you work with in your ministry?
Yeah. So since we've talked about it in the fall, I started to notice shame in my life. And so I would notice, I started to try to think about physically when I feel shame, what does it feel like? What in my body, can I sense shame? And it's like my shoulders, like I can feel, I can even imagine it now and maybe even feel it now, feeling a little nervous about a podcast. I can feel like some weight on my shoulders. It's like, yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it, weight, and kind of like creeps into it feels like it pulls me in, like pulls my head down and my arms in and makes me want to crumple up in the ball. And one time I was journaling about it, and I noticed I had just written about something that felt like it was bringing that feeling back up. And without thinking about it, I was covering my face while I was thinking, but my both hands were over my face, just like the emoji. I was encapsulating like the shame emoji. So it was fascinating. I didn't know I actually did that. You know that's what shame looks like on the emoji, but like I'm actually head down, covering my eyes and face. So that was interesting. I wouldn't do that in public. I guess I've learned not to, you temper it in public. But when I was just totally letting myself feel it, I was just intrigued by that was a physical manifestation of what shame feels like. In conversation, I definitely, I could feel myself avert eye contact, especially if there's something that brings up something shameful. I probably get fidgety. But yeah, mostly like I want to disappear. So if I'm looking away from you, then I don't feel like we're both connected. I don't know what it is, but yeah, the avoiding eye contact and that kind of thing. I've definitely seen that with people I work with. I work with young adults. I'm a pastor here, and the young adults I've worked with, I've also noticed avoiding eye contact is pretty normal, or avoiding you altogether, never coming back, or you can, if somebody's pretty consistent, and you know that there's a struggle in their life and then they disappear for a while, it's a pretty good chance that if I call them, if you call them, actually they probably want to be found. It seems like people do want to be found. So if I reach out and find them, they're willing to come in and tell me everything, but they weren't making the initiative to, their reaction was to like, let me get out of there. So maybe you're not even conscious. Maybe they found everything else to do on the night where we normally meet, or, but yeah, so avoidance, whether it's in the moment, eye contact avoidance, or avoidance, like let me actually hightail it out of here and not come back until I'm found, is that I've seen both of those for sure.
Yeah, it does. It takes, the avoidance of people, places, and things that bring up those feelings of shame is almost inevitable. And the avoidance of eye contact is probably the most common thing you'll see. I have clients that come in the office and I feel like I got to go over here and say, what did you say? Look at me. It's like, you want to see 60 to 80% of eye contact. Any more than that, they're probably just not there at all. They're just, looking at you.
It gets creepy at that point.
But you need to, when you were talking about, not showing up and not coming back, but wanting to be found, I think that is something that we really do seek. We want to be found. When I was a little girl and life would get really bad at my house, I developed a habit of going and reading in my grandmother's magnolia tree. And there were some branches that were kind of like an orange chair, and I would just take a book up there and hide. But I really wanted somebody to come and find me. And they didn't. And eventually I had to get down. And in that nobody coming to find me, it almost compounded the shame. See, you really aren't important. You really are insignificant. Nobody even noticed that you were not here.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that, most people, I will say every person wants to be seen, wants to be heard.
Yeah.
So if we can help people to feel safe, to come out of hiding, then, to come back, then I think we are representing what Christ wants us to represent.
Yeah. That's fascinating, because at the beginning of the podcast you said that shame is this fear of being known, and we're trying not to be known, but also there's something deep inside of us that longs to be known and seen and understood. And I think it's because it's dangerous, because if we're not known, then we can kind of either just be like anonymous, nobody, or but if we start to be known, then either we're rejected or we're accepted, because once they see us, then they have the opportunity to either reject you or accept you. If you're not known, they can, if whether or not they accept you is not nearly as painful, because they're not really seeing the real me anyways. But as soon as you put that real self out there, then rejection is possible, because now they actually see something that is the real me. And so, so there's kind of two sides of that spectrum, because rejection would be the most painful thing you can feel if you're really known and then rejected. But if you're really known and then accepted in that moment, that's what love is. That's probably the definition of love, to be known and then received and accepted or invited. So it's high stakes. As soon as you're willing to be known, the stakes are really high. And so that craving for love that we all have is tied to this need to be known. And if we are always avoiding relationship or avoiding sharing the vulnerable things or avoiding being seen, then it might be a little safer, but it's not going to be fulfilling, and we're not going to find the love that we all need. So
it leaves that hole in us just very empty, because we were never created to be by ourselves.
Yeah.
We were never created to be alone. And I think one of the most common survival beliefs that we develop or survival lies that we develop is I don't need anybody. I'm independent.
Yeah.
You know, we even got down to the one-man army at one point, you know, and I don't want a one-man army in my life. You know, it's like, but it's such a shame-based understanding. I mean, when, you know, and the big thing is fear.
Yeah.
I worked with a client not long ago, and she was like, I'm just angry, and I'm not giving up my anger, you know. And there'd been a lot of abuse in the past. And, you know, when we got right down to it, it wasn't anger at all. It was fear.
Interesting.
Because fear and anger feel so much alike in the beginning of them. They both click on.
Okay.
You know, but it's easier to be mad than it is to be scared. And so we see a whole world of angry people because they're scared.
Wow.
And they don't know what to do. They don't know the way back.
Yeah, that's
But one
fascinating.
person who looks into your eyes with the eyes of acceptance is incredibly wonderful. I mean, you think about it. Think about when, you know, like when your kids look at you and they're so adoring. It's like, oh. You know?
That's the truth. Yeah. As an artist, I've felt that. As a creative person, I've felt probably some of that real intense vulnerability that comes with being known when it comes to sharing something I've created, whether it's a poem I've written or something that has really truly come from the heart, a song I've written. I can definitely feel all the things that shame does, the avoidance of, like, if I've got something to share, it's like it's courage to share it with somebody or not, and the courage all is tied to this idea that if they see it, they have the power to reject me or accept me in that moment, because what they're seeing is a part of something deep down inside of me that I spent hours and emotions and thought into creating. And even if it's like, that was cool and kind of brushed off, it wasn't met with the acceptance that I really probably needed in that moment of, no, I'm bearing my soul here. And if it's just, okay, then that feels like rejection. So as an artistic person, it feels dangerous. And I think there's probably a lot more artistic people out there that are hiding and aren't willing to express that, because at some point in their childhood or beyond, they were shut down in that area and they felt that rejection once, and I'm not going to try that again, and then those skills don't get honed. But yeah.
It's really sad. You just hit on the other thing that shame does. It isolates us from each other. But the other thing it does is it prevents us from using the gifts that God gave us. You know, because you're right. I mean, if you're a child and you draw a picture, and somebody laughs at it, you know, or somebody says, that's terrible, you know, then you're probably not going to show that picture to anybody else, you know, and God gave us gifts to give and to show, and just to celebrate each other, the different things we can do. And when our gifts are shamed, then they go undone. So who knows how many poems haven't been shared, or songs haven't been shared, or pictures haven't been drawn, or you know, just things we haven't done because we're afraid somebody would say something. And we don't do what God gave us to give to each other. Yeah,
that could go with any dream somebody has, right? Any dream is a vulnerable part of you. So art or not, businesses that haven't been started, or medical breakthroughs that haven't been found because people crushed them early on, the dream.
And we'd rather be guilty than ashamed. I remember one time when I was working in the mountains of North Carolina, we found a boy who had been grown up in the woods, and he had never been to school. And he was a big kid. He was in the 8th grade, and he was put into the 8th grade, and he broke every rule there was. I mean, he was just terrible. But the bottom line was, he would rather break the rules and be guilty of breaking the rules than for you to see that he could not read and write.
Interesting.
And so, and we often do that. We'd rather be guilty and do something wrong than be inadequate and be something wrong. So you'll find people and that's one of the sources of taking responsibilities. If I'm guilty, I did it wrong, so if I do it differently, whatever happened will never happen again, or whatever happened will, I can change it. But if I am something wrong, I can't change it. And so that's one of the things that really blocks people, from just allowing themselves, because we want to maintain that sense of that illusion of power and control, that I could do it different. I really could do it different if I really wanted to, and that's a very common one.
Interesting.
Is I could do this, and then we don't try to do it because we don't want to. We know in our heart we couldn't do it. Like, I can't fly a plane, and I can sit there and pretend I could fly a plane, and I could think I could do it if I wanted to, but don't put me in the cockpit. I mean, it's like I really can't do that. So, I mean, that's kind of the way a lot of people live life, is avoiding doing things or learning to do things, and that's the other thing. If you don't learn the learning curve of learning. I can envision playing a guitar like you do, but when I pick it up, I can envision, playing for other people and singing and doing that. But if I pick it up, I'm going to go plunk, plunk, because I haven't learned. I haven't really done my part. God may have given me a gift, but it still has to be learned.
Yeah.
You still have to practice. It's an interactive process. Speaking of which, you wrote a song about shame after some of the stuff that we talked about, and I thought it might be a good way to end this whole podcast by letting you share that song with the people that are listening.
Sure. I just told you how scary that is, though.
You did, didn't you?
No, this is good. This is really good.
And one of the things that I think we always have to remember is the 20-60-20 rule. 20% of the people who hear this song are not going to like it. 60% aren't going to even listen. And then there's going to be 20% who are going to really, really like it.
That's great. Let's just hear from them. How about That's good.
But being known, I love your gift, and I love the way you love people. And I think we're very, very blessed to have you in our young adult ministry, and I watch how the kids are flourishing in there because of you.
Yeah, well,
and because you do walk in vulnerability, and that does take courage. Before we go to playing your song, I want to know if there's anything you'd like to say about what you felt writing the song, what the song says, and just why you wrote it.
Yeah, so I went home right after a session in your office about, I think it was the one where you said, no, you're not guilty for something somebody else has done. That's not yours to hold on to. And I saw this glimpse of God's love and his desire for me to be free from this, and that I've had a misconception about him in a way. And so I went home and I wrote this. I had this idea probably in the car on the way home that he's better than I ever thought he was. And so that's the main idea of the song, that God's better than I thought he was. He's better than I allowed him to be in my imagination of who he is. And so, it starts off with, I set out to forge myself a name. Like, I was trying, with self-reflection and self-definition, I was going to make a name for myself, and realized it wasn't half as good as what he called me when he passed us the wine and broke the bread and said, I'm willing to actually die for you. And so that's the concept, that he's better than we thought, and that if I try to build a name for myself, it's not actually going to be near as good as what he wants to call me. So
we can't create an image of ourselves that's better than the image that he created us to be, which is in his image. All right.
Yeah, here it is. When I set out to forge myself a name, pressure packed and shoulder loads of shame, I had a string of words to try to self-reflect and self-define, but none of them came close to what you said. When you passed the cup of wine and broke the bread, You're better than I ever knew. You're better than I ever knew. You're better than I dare to think. You're better than I knew. I was guilty of so many sins, and half of them were failure to forgive. I had a list of names to face, but suddenly ran out of grace when my own name was written on that page. But did you really crucify my shame? You're better than I ever knew. You're better than I ever knew. You're better than I dared to think. You're better than I knew. If I were to believe it, if I dared to trust that you felt it worth it to pay for me in blood. If I were to believe it, if I dared to trust that this was your initiative to offer me your love, then maybe I could step out of this shame. Maybe you would help me find my name. Oh, you're better than I ever knew. You're better than I ever knew. You're better than I dared to think. You're better than I knew.